It was a quiet summer evening in Surrey, the countryside air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of church bells fading into twilight, when Eleanor Whitmore stood by the tall French windows of her late husband's estate, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she held a glass of wine, her reflection shimmering against the glass like a ghost trapped between two worlds. For though she was a woman of elegance and restraint, grief had carved a hollow place inside her, and in that emptiness her two stepsons had returned, Thomas and William, both young men now, no longer the boys she remembered when she had married their father, but men carrying the shadows of his face and the storms of their own desires, their presence unsettling her in ways she dared not name aloud. For the house itself seemed to stir with them, the long corridors whispering memories, the oak staircase groaning as if it remembered every childhood footstep, and Eleanor, still draped in mourning black though a year had passed, found herself noticing the details she shouldn't: the cut of Thomas's jaw as he smiled too knowingly, the way William's voice carried a husky warmth when he addressed her as mother, the title heavy with irony, for neither of them had ever truly allowed her that place in their hearts. Yet now, as men, they lingered close to her in ways that left her breathless, as though testing boundaries, as though daring her to admit that she too felt the air charged, alive, forbiddance. The evening meal had been quiet, filled with polite conversation about London, about politics, about the running of the estate, but beneath the clinking of silverware and the pouring of claret, there had been an undercurrent, glances exchanged. Too long, silences stretched too thin, and when the servants finally cleared the dishes and left them alone with the low glow of candlelight, it was Thomas who rose first, his chair scraping softly against the wood, and walked to the piano in the corner, his fingers brushing the ivory keys as he looked at Eleanor with a half-smile that unsettled her chest. And he said, "Father always loved when you sang, do you remember, Eleanor?" Her name spoken without the formality, without the shield of mother, and in that moment William too leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers, as though weighing her reaction, as though he too wanted to see how far she would allow this dangerous game to play. She tried to laugh it off, to speak of lighter things, but the sound of her own voice trembled, betraying her, and when Thomas began to play a slow, haunting melody, she felt William's gaze burning across the table, the air between them thick with something unsaid, and Eleanor, torn between dignity and desire, rose with her wine glass and excused herself. But even as she walked the long hallway to her room, she absolutely knew that something had shifted tonight, that this house no longer belonged to memory and grief, but to something darker, hungrier, a story that was just beginning. And though she told herself to resist, to keep her distance, she also found her pulse quickening at the thought of tomorrow, and the dangerous fire that seemed inevitable. Asterisk, the next morning dawned with a heavy mist that clung to the Surrey fields, wrapping the estate in a ghostly veil, and Eleanor woke earlier than usual, her sleep restless with fragments of dreams she could not confess to anyone. Dreams in which the piano still played and eyes still burned into her with unspoken words. And as she stepped out of her chamber in a silk robe, the silence of the house was broken only by the creak of the old wood beneath her slippers until she reached the drawing room, where she found William already awake, leaning against the tall window with a book in hand, though his eyes were not on the page but on the pale horizon, his dark hair damp as if he had just washed away the night's unrest. And when he turned and saw her, the faintest smile tugged at his lips, one not of innocence but of recognition, as if he knew the same storm had passed through her sleep. And he greeted her softly, his voice low, "You're awake early, Eleanor," her name again, spoken too intimately. And though she tried to steady her breath and remind herself of propriety, the sound of it stirred something deep inside her chest like a forgotten song. She moved past him, pretending to busy herself with the silver teapot the servants had laid out, yet his presence lingered close, his shadow stretching across her own, and as she poured, he stepped nearer, his hand brushing hers as he reached. For the cup, the touch electric, fleeting, yet enough to send her pulse racing, and before she could draw back, Thomas entered the room, his stride confident, his shirt open at the collar, his hair tousled as if the night had not offered him rest either, and he paused at the doorway, his eyes flickering from Eleanor to William, reading the air instantly, a smirk ghosting across his lips as though he enjoyed catching them in this fragile space. "I see the household is awake before the sun," he said lightly, but the weight, and his voice was unmistakable, a challenge more than a remark, and Eleanor, flustered, excused herself with the excuse of needing fresh air, stepping quickly into the gardens beyond the glass doors, yet the brothers followed, one on either side of her, as if fate itself conspired to close her in, and among the roses heavy with dew. She felt trapped, not by walls, but by gazes, each one demanding, each one offering something she both longed for and feared, and it was Thomas who spoke first, his words carrying that boldness she had come to dread. "You pretend not to feel it, Eleanor, but you do, you must," his hand grazing the edge of a rosebush as though drawing blood would matter less than this confession. And William's silence beside her was more dangerous still, for his eyes spoke what his lips withheld, steady, unwavering, almost protective, almost possessive, and Eleanor's heart thundered against her ribs, for though she wanted to cry out, to restore order, to declare herself untouchable, she found the truth spilling into her own silence, her breath too quick, her lips parted as though she might answer. And in that charged moment, a distant bell tolled from the village, breaking the spell, reminding them all of the world outside this estate, of propriety, of law, of morality. And yet as she returned to the house, her hands trembling, she knew that the distance had already collapsed, that what once was unthinkable had already been thought, and worse, it had been felt, and now there was no unraveling it. The day passed in strange civility, the three of them moving through the halls like actors in a play, speaking of trivial matters while their eyes betrayed them, and Eleanor, in her solitude that evening, pressed her forehead against the cold glass of her mirror, whispering to herself, "This must end." Yet the echo of her own voice mocked her, because deep down she knew it had only just begun. That night, as the moon cast its pale glow over the countryside and the estate settled into uneasy silence, Eleanor wandered through the dimly lit corridors, her mind restless with thoughts she could not silence, and though she tried to occupy herself with a book, the words blurred into meaningless shadows. For the memory of the morning lingered Thomas's boldness, William's silence, fire in both their eyes that mirrored her own hidden weakness. And as she stood at the balcony of her chamber, the cold air brushing her skin, she heard footsteps approaching, steady and sure, until William appeared at the threshold, his expression unreadable, his voice hushed as though afraid of waking the house. "You shouldn't be alone like this, Eleanor," and though she should have dismissed him, should have demanded that he return to his room, she found herself rooted, her lips forming words she did not expect. "Perhaps I am never truly alone anymore." And the silence that followed was heavier than speech, a silence that carried the weight of everything unsaid, until William crossed the space between them, his hand brushing against the railing beside hers, so close she could feel the warmth of him, and his eyes locked with hers in that dim light, speaking 1,000 forbidden truths. And when she drew a sharp breath, ready to resist, he leaned closer, his whisper trembling, "I cannot pretend, not anymore." And before she could answer, Thomas's voice cut through the night like a blade, sharp and deliberate. "So it is you, William." "I suspected as much," and Eleanor spun, her heart leaping to her throat as Thomas stepped from the shadows. his face lit with both fury and triumph, his eyes fixed not on her but on his brother. And the air grew thick with tension, two forces colliding with her as their battlefield, and Thomas strode forward, his tone taunting yet laced with pain. "Do you think you can steal from me, brother? Do you think she belongs to you?" And William, unflinching, met his gaze. "She belongs to no one, Thomas, least of all you." And Eleanor, trembling, tried to intervene, her voice breaking. "Enough, both of you, this cannot be." But neither man yielded, their pride and passion towering above reason. And in that fragile moment, she saw what she had unleashed: rivalry turned to war, desire turned to poison. And though she begged them with her eyes, the truth had already burned too deep. Thomas reached for her wrist, pulling her closer with a force that startled her, his voice low, almost desperate. "Tell me you don't feel it, Eleanor. Tell me you don't wake in the night thinking of me." And before she could answer, William pulled her away, his hand steady at her back, his voice firm, protective. "You will not touch her like that." And in their clash she was torn, her breath shallow, her resolve crumbling. For though she wanted to deny them both, to claim innocence, she knew her heart betrayed her, splintered between two dangerous truths. And as the moon sank lower, the night closed around them like a secret that could never be undone. And Eleanor fled back to her chamber, her hands trembling, her heart in chaos, whispering to herself in the darkness, "This is the beginning of our ruin." Yet even as she wept into her pillow, she knew she would rise again the next day to face them both, unable to escape the storm that had already claimed her soul. Asterisk, the next morning dawned gray and heavy, rain streaking the windows of the Surrey estate as though the skies themselves bore witness to the storm inside. And Eleanor, pale and restless, tried to steady her hands as she poured tea in the drawing room. But her composure shattered when Thomas entered, his gaze hard yet strangely wounded. And William followed moments later, silent, shoulders tense, the air between them charged with a rivalry that needed no words. And Eleanor felt her heart throb painfully as she set the teapot down, her voice trembling. "We cannot go on like this, it will destroy us all." But Thomas only laughed bitterly, pacing before the fire, his tone sharp. "Destroy us? It is already too late, Eleanor. You let this happen. You invited him into what should have been mine." And though his words pierced her, she found no strength to deny them, for part of her knew he was right. Her silence, her stolen glances, her weakness had fueled their hunger. Yet William stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Do not place the blame upon her, Thomas. If you must fight, fight me, but leave her peace intact." And Thomas turned swiftly, his fists clenching, his face inches from his brother's. "Peace? Do you think she will ever know peace now? She will have to choose, William, and when she does, it will not be you." And Eleanor gasped, tears rising in her eyes. "Stop, please." "You will tear each other apart." But her pleas fell upon deaf ears as the brothers stared each other down like wolves circling prey, until at last Thomas stormed from the room, his footsteps echoing through the hall, leaving a silence more terrifying than his rage. And Eleanor collapsed into the nearest chair, her face in her hands, whispering, "What have I done?" While William knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers with a tenderness that only deepened her torment. "You have done nothing, Eleanor, nothing but be who you are. And he faltered, emotion breaking through his control. "I love you, though I know it is wrong, though I know it may destroy us all. I cannot change it." And Eleanor lifted her face, streaked with tears, meeting his gaze, her lips trembling with words she dared not speak. For in that moment the truth lay bare between them, unspoken yet undeniable, a love forbidden yet stronger than any law. And when she whispered, "William," her voice cracked under the weight of everything it carried, and he leaned closer, almost tasting her sorrow, almost tasting her surrender. when the door creaked again and Thomas reappeared, calmer now, yet his eyes burned with something far more dangerous than anger, a resolve that chilled her to the bone. For he had made his choice, and he would not lose. Not to her silence, not to his brother, not to fate itself. And Eleanor, caught between them, realized she was no longer simply a widow or a mother bound by duty, but the center of a tempest that would either bind them together forever or tear all three of them apart beyond repair. And outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the glass like the relentless beat of destiny, sealing her in a house where every step, every glance, every breath brought her closer to a truth she could no longer escape. Night fell over Surrey with a suffocating silence, the estate wrapped in shadows that seemed alive with secrets, and Eleanor stood before the grand window, staring out at the moonlight that touched the drenched gardens, her heart pounding with a terror she could not name. For she knew the moment had come when choices could no longer be postponed, when silence would no longer shield her. And behind her she heard footsteps, two sets, steady and purposeful, Thomas and William entering together, their faces carved with decision, their rivalry simmering beneath the surface. And she turned, her voice breaking, "Please, no more, I cannot bear it." But Thomas raised his hand to silence her, his tone cold and deliberate. "This ends tonight, Eleanor. No more games. No more stolen looks. You will tell us now who it is you belong to." And William, though quieter, carried the same demand in his steady gaze, his words heavy with restrained passion. "Eleanor, whatever happens, know that I would rather be damned with you than blessed without you. But you must speak, or this house will burn in the silence." And Eleanor trembled, caught between them, her entire life flashing before her eyes. The lonely years of her widowhood, the fragile warmth she had tried to build with her stepsons, the way love had seeped in like a thief, uninvited but unstoppable. And she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I never wanted this, not like this, but my heart was never mine to command." And Thomas stepped closer, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Then let it be me, Eleanor. I will fight until my last breath, if only you will choose me." But William reached her first, his hand finding hers, his grip strong yet trembling. "No, brother. Fighting will not win her heart. It is already spoken for." And Eleanor's tears fell as she tried to pull away. Yet she could not, for her hand remained locked in William's, her body betraying her choice before her lips could. And Thomas saw it, the truth slicing through him like a blade, his breath ragged, his face a mask of anguish that quickly hardened into fury. "So it is him," he spat, his voice shaking. "You would choose him over me? After all I've done, after all I've been?" And Eleanor, sobbing now, reached toward him. "Thomas, please." It was never about choosing, it was about surviving, about feeling alive again. But her words did not soothe. They only deepened the wound, and in that moment Thomas lunged, not at her but at William, his rage uncontained. The two men crashing against the furniture, their fists colliding in a brutal storm of grief and brotherhood betrayed. And Eleanor screamed, trying to pull them apart, her voice lost in the chaos, until at last William pinned Thomas to the floor, his own face twisted in sorrow as he choked out, "I never wanted this, but I will not let you destroy her. Not tonight." And Thomas, broken, his strength failing, turned his head away, tears streaking his face, his voice a whisper, "Then I have already lost." And with that he still not dead, but emptied. His rage spent, his heart shattered, and William released him, collapsing beside his brother, both men breathing heavily, both undone by the storm of love that had torn them apart. And Eleanor knelt between them, her hands trembling as she touched them both, whispering, "No one has won tonight. We are all broken." And the silence that followed was deeper than any scream, filled only with the sound of rain easing at last. the storm outside passing as though the world itself acknowledged the ending within, and later as dawn crept across. The Surrey countryside. Eleanor walked alone through the gardens, her dress soaked with dew, her face pale yet resolute. For she knew there could be no fairy tale ending, no neat resolution, only the haunting truth that love, once unleashed, could never be caged again. And though William stood at a distance, watching her with a devotion that burned even through the wreckage, and Thomas lingered in the shadows of the house, broken but breathing, she realized that her life had been changed forever on those unexpected nights, not by the choices she made, but by the hearts she had touched. Hearts that would never again be the same. And as she lifted her eyes to the soft morning sky, she whispered a vow to herself, "I will carry this love, this pain, this fire, for it is mine, and no one, not even fate, can take it away." And with that, Eleanor stepped forward into the uncertain light of tomorrow, leaving behind a house heavy with memory, with love forbidden, with grief unspoken, yet alive, forever alive in the hearts of those who had dared to feel.